Welcome back and thank you for joining A Shark's Perspective. I am Kenneth Shark Kinney, your host and Chief Shark Officer. First, let me tell you about an amazing sponsor who helps make this show possible. I hope that you'll take a look at Drips, the founders of conversational texting, where they use conversational AI to help you reach customers where they're most responsive, and that's on their phones. And working with major brands like 3 Day Blinds, Liberty Mutual, Credit Repair, and Gainsco, Drips is leading the way for some of the biggest brands in the world to improve engagement rates and outcomes for their prospects and customers. And now back to the show. Is the customer journey linear? More often than not, it is not, especially when considering all of the noise and touch points and apps and channels. It likely never was, but that was often the mindset that existed for so many when looking at data. And a lot of that siloed mindset is carried over. But was the customer journey really ever linear? That's some of what we're going to discuss today, and how marketers and brands and agencies can look at omni-channel more effectively today and going forward. Sandra Abi-Rashed is the VP Client Services at Digilant, the GM at Happyfication, and the co-founder of MENTORO. And on this episode, we'll discuss whether the customer journey was ever really linear, what it is today, breaking down silos, wearing different hats to make data-driven decisions, leveraging data points, content strategies, advertising and media hats for brands and agencies, mentoring the youth, leopards in fashion, popsicles, and a lot more. So let's tune into an omni-channel digital marketer with an omni-channel shark on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Sandra, thank you so much for joining us today on A Shark's Perspective. Tell us a little bit about your journey, your story, and career to date.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm so happy to be here. So I have about 20 plus years experience in digital business, publishing side, data analytics, and obviously omni-media marketing on both the client, the agency side, and the media side. I've worked in the startup space. I've worked for a CPG brand such as L'Oreal, and I currently work for Digilant as a VP Client Services.
So let's start off about customer journey. How have you seen that change over the years, and what's leading us up to where we are today?
So I think, typically, I think marketers still like to see the journey as something that's linear. And I'm sure you've seen this, Kenneth, when they want to show it, they show the upside down triangle and they say, there's the awareness, and then there's engagement, and then there's conversion. And they, love to see the numbers and the percentages and as they move from box to box. And I think that's just something that's stuck with the traditional marketing philosophy as a very linear journey, right? But then if we really, really stop to think about how people react to brands or to products, or how they consume products or media, the journey isn't linear. Where we Google talks about moments that matter. But what really fundamentally happens, and I know because it happened to me the other day, is, you're on Instagram and then you see an ad that's targeted to you, and then you shut it down. Then you go to search and then you see it on Google. And then 2 seconds later, you're on you're ordering it. You don't even know, your face recognition comes in. And then the next day your stand-up desk arrives. Like the journey isn't as linear as it used to be. And we're exposed to so many different touch points and so many different channels. I do think that the journey can be linear for big ticket items, like cars and things like that. But I think more often than not, we've trained our minds, I think, in theory, to focus on a funnel, but it drives people to think that the journey is actually linear when it's absolutely not anymore. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it did. I think one of the things, though, that, and I don't know if I'd call it pushback, more of a push into, is I don't know that the journey was ever linear. We just had more data points to maybe help develop the idea of a funnel that way, without necessarily, calling out the 4 Ps or something with past thinking. But
yeah,
the idea that anybody is looking at any one channel anymore, unless it's for a $5 makeup brush. I don't even know what a makeup brush would cost. What does a makeup brush cost?
20 could be 5 to 25 to 30.
$5 to $25 makeup brush. For something like that on Instagram, you could click through, buy it, boom, and it's done. Yeah, happens all the
Absolutely.
time. We're not doing,
Yeah.
I wouldn't think that, well, I'm going to have to ask my wife now. I can't imagine that people are doing that much research on buying something that simple, but agree completely. The journey's not linear because you're seeing so many different traffic sources in the way, especially with now how we programmatically buy a lot of this media. Today it's on so many different channels, and that's just the ones that we know of, not even including the non-trackable billboards that are still used
Absolutely.
and still convert, a lot of TV ads that are data-driven linear, but not all of them are trackable the same
Yeah.
way.
I mean, absolutely. How many times have you been in a car and then you see the out of home and you look it up
Exactly.
on Google and then you search for it? Or but I love what you said. There is pushback, and was the journey ever linear? And I think when we had less touch points, when it was about direct marketing, when you did have one way and it was TV, I think it was more linear than it is today.
True.
So
True.
yeah.
So let's set up first, then how we look at silos as part of that journey. What are silos to you and what you see with the brands you work with today?
So my definition of silo, and you mentioned it, are on both sides. So there are silos that exist on the brand side. So within a brand, if we take a CPG company as an example, very often they have teams that are responsible for social, and another team that does traditional TV linear, and another team that's doing communications. And under communications, they're bundling a different part of social, and then another team that's doing data analytics. So the way the media performance is analyzed is in silos and not in a holistic approach where you can bring the performance to a common currency and be able to compare a video to a TV ad to an out of home to digital. So there are, I mean, that's a fact. There are still silos that exist within the actual companies, organizations.
And that's just on if they spend media dollars. That's the other problem, is then you're starting to think about how do we stitch together webs and how did a blog perform? And maybe they came back a month later from something and they've cleared out their cookies and they go back and look at your site.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So then, yeah, we can add on e-commerce and how they're behaving there. And are they buying in store and per retailer and the retailer store or your store? So you're right. I think when I'm talking about silos, I'm isolating the media part. Good point. And then if we look at the media landscape also, it is silos. It has been, and it is even more so with vertical integration. And take Disney as an example, or telcos. You can go there and they'll say, we can offer you everything from the TV to the ad to the digital to the mobile. And if they don't have a telco partner, then they'll find one. So you've got these vertically integrated silos. Google, Facebook, same. And then what happens is you've got a silo on this side, a silo on this side. And then if you look at it, the agency business is very often a brand will have, we have one agency that does social, and we have another agency that does traditional, and then another agency that does this. And sometimes we'll find that we can work collaboratively to come together and have a holistic view. But Kenneth, it's tough when everyone
The
wants a piece of
emphasis
the
is
pie,
the
right?
word. Yeah, you had
Right?
me at sometimes.
Right. Yeah, right. So all of this coexists, and the challenge, I think, is how do you make sense of it all? Because the silos do exist, and then you can't break it all up. But how do you make sense of it all with a methodology, or sometimes a technology, or even the people that have a holistic view, that have like a traditional background, but also digital background, but also business background. So it's and data. So it's how do you tie it all together? And we're jumping into another topic, but McKinsey used to call that business translators. How do you get people who can actually translate all of that and tie it in a nice bow so that we can, one, understand it, two, execute on it, and then report on it, and then be able to make it actionable in a business sense?
So what is your advice on how they get there? How can a marketer listening to this today start breaking down silos? at least on the media side?
Yeah. So I think,
How do we get them past sometimes?
so I do think that there isn't one solution. I'd love to talk about, something that's fundamentally linked to data, because I think it's important. And I think that's the part that most brands skip, saying, okay, what do we have today? What do we have access today in these silos that could help us better understand our consumer? And what I mean by that is, oftentimes brands will say, well, we don't have anything. And then we'll start digging and say, well, do you have Google Analytics? Okay, check, you've got that. Okay, do you have Facebook account? Check, you've got that. Do you have any surveys? Check. Yeah, we have that. Okay, perfect. So in addition to that, there's the option to explore what we call declarative data. And this is something that you've heard about before. And there are a number of different sources: Nielsen, GWI, so many other declarative panels or mega panels that can give you information on individuals. And what does using a declarative panel do? What it allows you to really look at from a very agnostic perspective, what the profile of your consumer really looks like. From and I'll give a perfect example. You brought up makeup before. So if we wanted to look at women in the US who are interested in beauty, or who have purchased beauty products in the past, and who are interested in fashion, and who are between 25 and 35, and are interested in sustainability, if we wanted to add some behavioral, how many are there? One, what's the market? What's the total addressable market? And then the obvious suspects, what sociodemographics, what are their values, their perceptions, what do they like, what do they not like, what are their interests? And then from a media perspective, this is when we start to look at the consumer as a whole and think, okay, well, how do they interact with media today? How do they consume media today? And is it different per segment when we look at it? And are there any touch points or channels that they have a higher affinity with? And then you start to think about, okay, the persona that we've built that could be called, Julie. Okay, so she's interested in all of these things. Here's her profile, but she spends most of her time on social, but she has a stronger affinity with out of home, according to the data. And this is when you start to build something that's broader than, I want to target these women and I'm going to do everything on social. Because what that gives you as data, as a starting point, and I'll get back to that, as a starting point is, okay, so if I know that these women that I want to reach are in Florida and California and Texas, usual suspects, and Illinois, and maybe there's something going on in Iowa that's an outlier because I'm seeing over-indexing there, but I'm also seeing that the behavior in terms of media consumption is different, then that really brings us as marketers to look at that consumer from a more holistic way and think, okay, well, they're consuming differently, so I should be approaching that differently, and I can't just put all my eggs in one basket. And maybe when I'm putting my $500,000 in social, the data is actually telling me that I'm over investing in social and that I should be putting some in out of home, because they're both consuming just as much and they both have high affinity. So I'm going through it quickly, but the idea is really to use the data and I did say, as it's the first point, the data is one thing. A question that often comes up is, well, how much do you rely on that data to break the silos and come up with a more holistic plan? Well, there's the data. And then, as well as I know, Kenneth, there's the media reality, which is like budget and what do you have and what do you want to do? And then there's the brand reality. Like, I don't want to do TV, or, we're not an out of home brand. We don't have, so I think, I said data was my first answer. How do you do that? Well, you can start with data and start with information that we have, but we have to consider the rest. And that's the part when we go back to business translators, like, how do you make sense of everything and then execute on it and look at how much should we be investing by silo, because we know that there's some overlap, or we know there's no overlap, or in California it should be
Great
this
point.
and in Florida it should be that.
So what's the advice you would give then to the brand marketer as to how do they go start breaking down those silos as well? Because a lot of them are going to hand off their advertising dollars to an agency.
Right. And I go back to the data, Kenneth, because I really think that whether you're an agency or a brand or even a social media partner or even PR, we need to start with data. And whether it's declarative data or any type of panel data or data from GA or anything that we have, we need to start with the data, really understand how people are interacting with the brand today, how people are engaging with content, how people are consuming media. What's the journey? That's what we're talking about, is what is the journey? And I think whether you're on the agency side or the marketing side, using data to better understand consumer behavior and what we call cognitive marketing, and how people think and what are their emotional and rational triggers and what would make them interact with a brand is fundamental, because that's what we'll use. Again, if I have a marketing director hat on, or an agency or a content strategy, it's using the data to make better decisions and making sure that data is actionable. So that's the one. Yeah.
I love what you said about an introductory data point. One of the data points that I've used for content before was leaning into how did my advertising perform and how were people reacting? And that gives you an additional place to think of bringing in advertising and marketing, content marketing together. How are they reacting to ads? Sometimes that can be as powerful a trigger because that's getting put in front of people.
Yeah.
Not everybody wants to click on an ad, but if I know that somebody's reacting to an ad that's red as opposed to blue, then I know that I need to write more content about red as well. And that's another data point to start breaking down some of the silos.
Absolutely. And if we just I'd love to touch on creative, because you're talking about in content strategy, because oftentimes, when we're putting our media hat on and we're looking at, okay, how does the data help me make better decisions in terms of breaking silos for media? That's one thing, but that same data could actually be used to develop better content strategy or better partnerships or better influencer marketing. That it could help us with a whole host of things that may not fall within the media box, right? And that's when you break different silos too, because you're all the departments within a brand or an organization are using the same data, understanding the same audiences, building the audience models in a similar way and agreeing on that, and building their strategies together. That's a really good way to start breaking silos, when you all have a common understanding, a single source of truth of your audience and how they behave. Yeah.
Let's talk about media silos a little bit. Talk about how you see the setup with media silos today, because they strongly exist with some wall gardens that I believe are growing and getting taller.
Right. So on the media side itself, listen, so we know that that's a challenge, and we know they're growing and getting taller. That's a great way to put it. And even then, we need to be smart, I think, about how we are tracking and reporting within those silos, and then using, sometimes it's a technology, or it could be an attribution or a platform or something to consolidate the performance. One, bring everything to a common currency, and then there is I don't want to call it a guessing game. You can't put a finger on a percentage of overlap. There's anyone who says, I've got the formula to be able to do that is lying. But you can use the data, as we saw before, to understand what the overlaps are in terms of affinities across different touch points, and then use that and apply it when you're looking at performance within those silos, and try to get a better mathematical sense of where things are going. And then the other thing that absolutely should be considered, and again, I don't think a lot of brands are doing this unless they have a very strong data analytics team or a partner to help them with that, is not relying on the silos in media, but really looking at what we call econometric modeling, and looking at, well, how is bringing in the business data and layering that on top of the media performance, that it doesn't really matter where it's coming from. It could be coming from, a telco, it could be coming from a TV or the giants, and consolidating that, but then looking, well, when I invest here, what happens to my business performance? And when I invest here in social and on TV, what happens to my business metric? So the whole concept of looking at declarative modeling upfront to understand media consumer behavior and media affinities and opportunities, and then looking at the end of the workflow and trying to find correlations between business performance and media performance have nothing to do with the firewalls or the cookies or device IDs that everyone's talking about now. Is like, what are we going to do when they go away? We're really looking at, if I do this in media and if I invest this much, how do my business metrics perform? So it really is more on probabilistic performance and statistical mathematics than anything. So it's a very different approach to, here we're talking about breaking silos from a performance perspective, and not just focusing on what is this silo doing for me.
Yeah, so they can use data, but what else can they do? What else can marketers do?
Well, I think fundamentally, if we start with the data and think about their marketing strategy differently and reversing the model, that's something that can help break silos. And what I mean by that is, typically brands and some agencies will start with the big creative, like the big wow creative, like we have this product, we want awareness, let's build a TV spot, let's build a creative. And then they look at, okay, which channels and which touch points are we going to push this on? If you reverse the model and look at data first, it really does help you come to the table with a more holistic approach with less silos. Because again, you're looking at the data and you're saying, okay, you know what? We don't need the spot. We need more out of home. We need more of this. And then using the data that has the values and perceptions of your audience, and understanding what are the keywords that are going to make them react, and is that content strategy, because it's part of the media, different on the West Coast versus the East Coast? Is it different by state? So it's really, instead of starting with a creative and then thinking about touch points, it's using the data to determine the touch points and determine the content. So it's really like a reverse model effect. So that's the second, I guess, approach that could be applied by marketers.
Great point. So one of the things you're real passionate about is mentoring the youth. Tell me a little bit about that and the program you're running.
Yeah, so in 2016, I launched a mentoring program called MENTORO. And the objective of that program was really to connect more senior, experienced individuals with the younger generation, and in a very light way, just connecting them for conversations. The program launched in Montreal, and we launched cohorts of mentors in a specific theme. So we launched a theme of mentors in fashion and communications, and in digital. And when I moved to Miami 2 years ago, we launched mentors in the luxury space. We're launching retail specialists in New York early next year. So it's 25 to 30 mentors in each cohort. We recruit mentees, and they're off to have cups of coffees together, a little bit like what we're doing today, just a chat.
Just a chat. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Sandra, you're in beautiful Miami.
I am.
So I head north of there a lot for diving trips with sharks. And I ask this of all of my guests on a shark's perspective. It's part of the reason why I got the nickname I have. But what is your favorite kind of shark and why?
Oh, my favorite shark. I love the leopard shark. I've always loved the leopard shark, but I think it's because I just have this affinity with fashion.
Oh, okay.
So I'm in the water. I'm like, you look great. You look hot.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great point. I'm actually going to be diving with them in California, in San Diego, in a little over a month. So
cool.
All right. Well, Sandra, it's a special time in the show. Are you ready for the 5 most interesting and important questions you're going to be asked today?
I'm a little nervous, but yeah, shoot.
All right. Number 1, Cafe Cubano or a Cafe Americano?
Cafe Cubano, all the way.
Yeah, I agree. Look, I believe everything great this country has had to offer is amazing. However, the Cubans, despite a few dictatorships and oppressive regimes, have us beat with coffee. So hats off to the Cafe Cubano. All right. Number 2, donuts or popsicles?
Popsicles. Absolutely. Hands down.
I'm leaning into an article that was on Shout Out Miami, where he talked about salty donut for delectable donuts, or cielito for the one-of-a-kind frozen artisan pops.
Right.
So that's where I was doing my studies. So. All right, number 3, Summers in Canada, where you're from, or winters in Miami?
Definitely winters in Miami. I mean, summers in Canada and Montreal, where I'm from, are absolutely fantastic. We have all the festivals in the summer, so summers need to be in Montreal, and winters need to be down here.
No, I'll take summers in Miami. I'll year round in
Summers
Florida.
in
So,
Miami, it's just too hot.
well, you can go diving though,
You could dive all year round.
snorkel all year round. I mean, it's amazing. But I'd go to the other coast. I'd go to the other side for cleaner water anyway. So number 4, Canadian football or the National Football League. I don't know if you're an Argonauts or a Dolphins kind of fan.
I'll say, there's just more action here on this side of the border, so I'll say NFL. Right? That was the right answer.
That was the right answer. No, and you got Tua there. So Tua Tagovailoa. So number 5, and the most important question that you're going to be asked today is biscuits or cornbread?
Biscuits. I tried cornbread, and I tried and tried and tried, and I just can't. Biscuits.
No, well, with Cuban food, cornbread will work a little better, but biscuits are pretty hard to beat anywhere around the world.
Biscuits are good with my Cubano coffee.
Good point. All right. So Sandra, where can people find out more about you, find out more about the work you're doing at Digilant, keep up with your thought leadership and more?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me on LinkedIn, absolutely, or digilant.com. I also have a nonprofit mentoring program, so mentoro.co.
Sandra, thank you again for joining us on A Shark's Perspective. So there was my conversation with Sandra Abi-Rashed, the VP of Client Services at Digilant, the GM at Happyfication, and the co-founder of MENTORO. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from our conversation with her. First, you've heard me talk a lot about breaking down silos. We still don't look holistically enough to measure, plan, and execute both marketing and ad spend. The customer journey, the real one you can't see all of, includes all of the touch points. So try to expand your view, and measurement should be done as a team sport. Leverage your data to build strategies together to use a single source of truth and expectation. Second, love Sandra's comments on business translators, not enough of them to translate the overarching view, to make much of this actionable in a business sense. We look at it too siloed often, not the way customers do. Third, consider other data points to help you learn from and build future creative. Some of the other data sources dictate because they provide a lot of data, but they don't always have to be the only source of data that you're used to using. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. I'm so thankful to everyone who listens, and a big thank you to my sponsor and the team at Drips. Please consider writing a review and letting me know your thoughts on the show. Remember, we need less silos and more sharks. And please join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.